Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. And this week, we have a deck I am super excited about. We are heading to Modern to play a deck built around Metallurgic Summonings. This is Blue-Red Summonings for Modern. This deck has been super awesome. It's really fun to play, very unique, and I've been amazingly impressed by Metallurgic Summonings in Modern. Anyway, a quick reminder before we break down the deck. If you enjoy Budget Magic and you like this Blue-Red Summonings deck, it would be amazing of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So as you can see, Blue-Red Summonings, 91 bucks in the paper world, 31 takes on Magic Online, so incredibly cheap, especially for a Modern deck. So let's talk about this deck. First off, we are built around Metallurgic Summonings, and Metallurgic Summonings is very powerful because it supports doing stuff decks already want to do. So we're playing a blue-red deck. You probably saw on the deck list, we are all spells, no main deck creatures whatsoever. And Metallurgic Summonings just wants us to cast spells. So we get a Summonings on the battlefield, then whenever we cast an instant or a sorcery spell, we get an XX colorless construct artifact creature token, where X is the spell's converted mana cost. Then we can also pay 5, and if we have 6 artifacts, sack it, get all our spells back from the graveyard. But the big deal is making these artifact tokens whenever we cast a spell. So that's what the deck's built around. It's somewhat similar to the standard versions in how it plays, but in Modern, everything is just pushed to the max. You can do so much more with Metallurgic Summonings because the spells are so much more efficient. It's so much easier to stick a Summonings and all of a sudden make 5 or 6 artifacts in a turn, or make one super huge artifact and win the game. So let's talk about how this actually works. First off, one of the key things with this deck is cantrips. Cards that draw us more cards, giving us the ability to keep cycling through our deck. And when we have a Metallurgic Summonings out, all of these cards are not only cheap, and they not only draw us another card and do something else, but they also give us a construct artifact creature token. Yes, with Serum Visions and Thought Scour, that token's not big, it's just a 1/1, and with Desperate Ravings, it's a 2/2, but these make good chump blockers, eventually can overwhelm our opponent by just going wide, and make sure that we stay alive when our opponent has threats out. That's the challenge with Metallurgic Summonings. We're casting it on turn 5 most likely, sometimes even later, and then we gotta make sure we can kind of stabilize and not die to our opponent's stuff, and having these cheap spells really helps. So Serum Vision helps us find our Summonings in the early game, also sets up our draws in the late game. Thought Scour and Desperate Ravings are really important because, as you'll see as we go along, our deck wants to take advantage of the graveyard, and the way we're doing that is just purely by having cards in the graveyard. So Thought Scour, for a reason we'll talk about in a minute, is kind of 1 mana, make a 1/1 if we have Summonings, draw another card, which is great, and then add 3 mana, like a Dark Ritual for one of our really important spells, 2 of our really important spells actually. Desperate Ravings is nice because it has flashback, so if we mill it with Thought Scour, we can cast it from the graveyard, and we can cast it twice, so that's 2 tokens, and except for Serum Visions, all of these cards are playable at instant speed, so our opponent goes to attack with their Tarmogoyf, we can just Thought Scour, make a 1/1 block, Desperate Ravings, leave up our spells during our opponent's turn, and that allows us to leave up some counter spells, Remand, Mana Leaks, Izzet Charms, and this means we can leave up our counters. If our opponent plays something we need to counter, tries to destroy our Summoning, something that will kill us, we can Remand it, we can Mana Leak it, but if our opponent does nothing, then we can Thought Scour, Desperate Ravings, keep making tokens, cycling through our deck, filling our graveyard. Remand is nice because it draws us another card. We can also do some really cool tricks with Remand. Once we get a Summonings out, we can cast a spell, which triggers Summonings to get a token, and then we can Remand that spell, which again triggers Summonings to get a token, and we get the spell back to our hand, and we draw another card. Then we cast the first spell again, get another token. So just with Remand, we can often make 3 or even 4 tokens, counting the card we draw off of Remand, for a really low cost, and this lets us do some really neat tricks. Mana Leak, just an efficient counter. Izzet Charm is nice because it does everything. This kind of transitions us to the next part of our deck. It can counter a non-creature, it can loot and fill our graveyard and help us find our Summonings, and it can deal 2 damage to a creature, so a removal spell. And that's the other key piece of this deck, is in the early game, and even after we have a Summonings, but especially especially in the early game. We have a lot of burn spells to help kill our opponent's creatures, make sure we live long enough to actually resolve a summoning. So in the early game with this deck, we're countering some stuff, we're throwing bolts and electrolyzes at our opponent's creatures. Then after the summonings, all these cards are still great. They can go to our opponent's face if we want them to, and they're making the construct token. So bolt, just super efficient. Electrolyze is awesome. It is surprisingly good. It kills a lot of stuff, sometimes gets two things, and it draws us a card, and it makes a 3/3 with summonings. And then Gut Shot is really sneaky good in Modern. It kills Inkmoth Nexus. It kills actually every Infect creature. It kills most Affinity creatures. It kills Dark Confidant and Delver as he gets and Snapcaster Mage, and the list really goes on and on. Noble Hierarch, there's so many things that one damage kills, and this is really sneaky with summonings because we can tap out for a summonings and then use the Phyrexian mana cost to cast Gut Shot for free, make a 1/1, and use that as a surprise chump blocker. So sometimes this helps us tap out for summonings on turn 5 and still survive until we untap with summonings by being able to block our opponent's biggest threat with the 1/1 we get from Gut Shot. So far, we've talked about a lot of counter spells, removal spells, card filtering spells, but we haven't really seen a payoff for Metallurgic Summonings, and that's the sweetest part of this deck. Is once we get a summonings down for like 2 or 3 mana, we can just make the biggest threats imaginable. And this is the next 2 cards we're going to talk about are the reasons that Metallurgic Summonings is really sweet in Modern. So we have Delve, and the Delve mechanic is absolutely absurd with Metallurgic Summonings, because with Delve we can pay a really low amount of mana. So for example, maybe 3 mana for Temporal Trespass, 2 mana for Logic Knot, and we're casting spells that are massive. So Temporal Trespass, pretty straightforward. When we played Metallurgic Summonings in Standard, we were using Part the Water Veil, get a 6/6, take an extra turn. That cost us 6 mana though. With Metallurgic Summonings in Modern, in Temporal Trespass, and remember, Thought Scours, Desperate Ravings, all these cheap removal spells, our graveyard gets filled really fast. So by the time we play Summonings, we Temporal Trespass for 3 mana, exiling 8 cards from our graveyard, and we get an 11/11 construct token, and we get another turn so we get to attack right away. So that's kind of one of the big finishes. Sometimes we can wait and do it all in one turn if we can wait long enough on summonings, kind of play the control game with our removal and our counters, get up to 8 lands, play summonings, immediately Temporal Trespass, take an extra turn, get an 11/11, start attacking, then we untap and we're casting more spells, and we can even ultimate, so to speak, or use the second ability on Metallurgic Summoning sometimes, because once we untap with summonings, things get out of control really quickly. And then Logic Knot is super spicy. It's a counter in the early game that we can use to stay alive, and then after we have our summonings, it's 2 mana, exile X number of cards, we counter a spell, but we get a huge construct. A lot of times we can, say, get to 7 mana, play a summonings, our opponent goes to their turn, they try to cast something, we can Logic Knot, exile like 18 cards from our graveyard, and have a 20/20, enough to just one-shot our opponent with this huge 20/20 construct, because the X actually counts towards Metallurgic Summonings, it counts towards the converted mana cost. So for each card that we exile from our graveyard, our construct token is getting 1 power and toughness bigger. So it's a really sweet synergy with Metallurgic Summonings. The rest of the deck, we have some mana, Shivan Reef, Swiftwater Cliffs, mountains, and islands. Pretty straightforward, very budget friendly. This is a part of the deck that could be upgraded for Modern, but this mana base seems to work alright. Our deck draws so many cards, we can kind of get by without having as many duels, because we just brute force our way through with our Serum Visions and Desperate Ravings to find the lands that we need. And then 1 Desolate Lighthouse for a bit of looting. And then in the sideboard, Anger of the Gods helps against aggressive decks, Affinity, Zoo, Burn sometimes if they're playing the Coddles. Is it Staticaster? Like Gut Shot, both of those cards are just so good against some decks. In fact, Affinity, those same decks, we have a lot of stuff for aggro. I think we can kind of keep up with Control, because with Control, the game goes long, all we got to do is get to a point where we can resolve our summonings, and then it's almost impossible for a Control deck to win. A lot of those decks, at least in the main deck, can't deal with it, and even in the sideboard have very few answers, so we just wait and wait and wait, finally slip through our summonings, and then the game's going to end in like a couple turns. So we're mostly focused on staying alive against aggro in our sideboard. Twisted Image is for Spell Skite, also Thing in the Ice, cantrips, kills it. pretty powerful. Negates and Dispels do come in against control, also some combo decks, but these help us force through our summonings, make sure we don't die to Become Immense or Scape Shift. And then Relics for graveyards, Vandal Blast, also for affinity, but other artifacts as well. We do need to get rid of Ensnaring Bridge. Our deck doesn't quite have enough burn to win through Ensnaring Bridge. If our opponent gets a bridge down and we can't attack with our constructs, our plan is to cast all our burn spells at our opponent's face, and then ultimate Metallurgic Summonings, get all those burn spells back, and do it all over again to burn our opponent out. So that is Blue-Red Summonings for Modern, and I have to say, this deck has been super exciting, super awesome this week. I'm really interested in exploring Metallurgic Summonings in Modern. This is the budget version of the deck, and I was very impressed with it. And there are some other cards that are just super powerful and seemingly very good with summoning. So I'm excited to keep trying to brew around it and figure out if there's a way to make this a real deck. You have Disrupting Shoals, you have Sickening Shoals, you have all these like Soul Spikes, Commandeer, these free spells that you can cast in Modern, which theoretically allow you to just tap out on turn 5 for a summonings, and then maybe just win the game on the spot by casting these free spells. So I think there's a lot of brewing to be done around Metallurgic Summonings. I think this is a great framework. This can have success at the FNM level. Pick this up, you can win games on Magic Online. So I really like it as a starting point, but I'm really excited to explore Grixis summonings and blue-black summonings and maybe an upgraded blue-red summonings with Blood Moons to kind of lock the opponent out. There's a ton of things to do with Metallurgic Summonings, and the thing I like about this budget build is I think you're going to keep a lot of these spells in the deck, regardless of what direction you go with summonings. So if you end up getting this deck in paper on Magic Online, I think this gives you a really solid base for all those different summonings possibilities, and then you can tweak it, kind of work with your upgrades, and figure it out. There might be a really competitive Metallurgic Summonings deck out there, because I was super impressed with how this budget version played out this week. So anyway, that's been our deck tech for Blue-Red Summonings in Modern, and that's our budget magic for this week. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.